Recovery Sort Of is a podcast where we discuss recovery and addiction topics from the perspective of people living in long-term recovery. This podcast does not intend to represent the views of any particular group, organization, or fellowship. The views expressed here are solely the opinion of its contributors. Be advised there may be strong language or topics of an adult nature.
All right, everybody. Hey, welcome back. It's Jason. I'm a guy in long-term recovery, and I'm here with Billy.
Hi, this is Billy. I'm also a person in long-term recovery.
And we're here to talk about recovery, sort of, as always. So where we're going to start this week, my daughters are taking a life skills class. Just for reference, they're 14 years old. They're in 8th grade. They're twins. And so if you wonder why I say daughters and not daughter, so we're in the car the other day, and we're driving to their basketball practice, and they're telling me about this life skills class they're taking, and my daughter's describing it, and the things they're being taught, and this Narcan idea, and I shared with them, like, I have Narcan on me, right? Like, it's something I carry around. They're like, really? They're shocked by this. I'm like, yeah. They're like, why? And I'm like, because if I run into a situation where I need it, right? I don't know. I mean, I don't know that I'm going to encounter that in my life, but I might. Who knows? And why not have it? So they're going on about more of the stuff they're getting taught, and then my daughter says, "Yeah, and we heard about these Narcan parties they're having," and I'm like, "What?" And she's like, "Yeah, the people are getting a lot of Narcan together." And if you're not familiar with this, so Narcan is it's a drug that if you have overdosed on an opioid, Narcan is a drug that you can administer that hopefully will kind of kick the little dealies out of the receptor sites in your brain and revive you to some extent, right? It like reverses the effect of what the opioid is doing. And so it has saved a lot of lives. It has brought a lot of people back who are in the process of overdose. And you can read all about it online. But what my daughters were saying was they're being taught that there's these ideas of Narcan parties. And so what happens is a lot of addicts, I don't know, 5-10 addicts that are in the neighborhood, they all get together in a basement, and they get all these different heroin and fentanyls from all around the neighborhood, right? Like they've pulled together all this money to throw this large party of all these mix of heroins and fentanyls. And then what they do is they're going to have a party, and they're going to overdose on purpose, right? And then they're going to bring each other back. And this is the whole concept of a Narcan party, is that all these individuals are going to take all these different heroins and fentanyls in some overdosing way, and then they're all going to administer Narcan on each other and continually bring each other back. And I just, the whole concept of this is so absurd to me. I had heard somebody describe it to me before, that they believed that this was going on, and I was just like, who came up with this ridiculous propaganda to hate on addicts, basically, to shame addicts, right? Like, we should never have Narcan, because if we're giving them this, they're definitely going to have these Narcan parties, right? And I just can't get over the fact that we're like teaching this information to people in schools.
Yeah, and the absurdity of some of that, I mean, if you just think through that idea a little bit, you
Right.
realize how stupid it sounds. I mean, most people that are, heroin addicts, especially hardcore heroin addicts that are trying to push themselves to the point of overdose, which I don't think most addicts are ever trying to push themselves to the point of overdose. That's never the goal,
Just real close.
Yeah, you want to be high, but you're not trying to kill yourself most of the time, or at least not consciously anyway. The amount of money that you would just have basically wasted by going out, securing heroin, and spending your money on it to then get high. When you take this, the actual drug is called naloxone. Narcan is the brand name, but naloxone is the actual drug. When you take that, it's actually an opiate blocker, and it goes into the receptors in your brain and blocks the effects of heroin and immediately brings you out of a high. So you immediately lose your high. So why on earth? It's like saying, yeah, I went out and drank 5 beers, and as soon as I started to feel loose, I threw up 10 times or whatever I needed to do to not feel that way anymore. Right. It's like, why would you waste money on that? Not only that, but you're talking about hardcore heroin addicts who, don't typically have this unlimited money resources, to be wasting money on heroin to then Narcan themselves out of. Like, it's just a stupid idea all the way around.
Rarely did I ever have the money to buy the heroin at one spot, much less 4 or 5 different places. That's incredible.
To be able to buy it and get high and then bring myself out of a high to then spend more money to get high right after that.
I'm almost jealous. I kind of want to go find these addicts that are having Narcan parties and say, how are you doing it, right? Maybe you're doing it successfully. Like, I need to go back and do it the right way.
Right. And what's hilarious is I had first heard this from someone I know who's a business professional in the community. And I'm sure he heard this somewhere. I don't think he originated the idea. Right. I'm sure it got, propagated somewhere, within the community. But this is a person that's involved with the Republican Party of this county and is involved with, local businesses, is involved with local elections, that is, connected with political people in this county. And if those are Jason's daughters go to Cecil County Public Schools. And so if these ideas are being propagated within our community, within the, political system, it should be a note of just how out of touch any of these people are with actual addiction or the actual problems that are going on within the addict community. I mean, it's very sad, say it's a completely stupid idea that if you think through it for half a minute, if you put any kind of effort into that, the idea of that, it's just absurd.
Now, am I wrong here? Doesn't Narcan also have the possibility? You said it brings you immediately out of the overdose. Can it also send you into the withdrawal? Like, if you use it? I thought there was something about that where you could start to feel kind of sick.
I'm not sure about that.
Okay, so let's not say that we know that for sure.
Yeah, I don't know that for sure.
I thought that was a thing.
It could be. Yeah, I'm not sure. I haven't heard that part. But there's a couple different, propaganda, I'll say, ideas floating around out there. There's, the thing of this Narcan-resistant fentanyl. Right. We've heard about that. That's not a thing either. There's no drug that's Narcan resistant.
Yeah, now that we've used it a few times, it's grown accustomed to it, and it knows how to be stronger than Narcan.
Yeah. There's also some misinformation out about being able to get a contact high from people that are on fentanyl or heroin, that if you touch them, and this has been and where this comes in is for medical people or first responders, emergency responders, and that information is being circulated within those communities.
Oh yeah,
and there's been so that when you go out to a call, and you can't blame like a first responder. Like in this community, most of them are volunteers. They are not paid, people willing to take this risk. Like, these are volunteers, your local neighbor that's volunteered to try to help do something good for the community. I don't want to make it sound like I'm down on them at all. These are admirable people that are going out and doing thankless work on a volunteer basis. That is incredibly kind and generous on their parts. But if they hear these rumors or get fed this misinformation, of course they're scared to death. They go out to a guy and he's overdosing on the ground, and all of a sudden they don't want to fucking touch him because they think they might get high off fentanyl.
Right.
And there's no evidence to that. The stories that this has happened have all been very sort of, anecdotal. Like, there's no scientific research. In fact, the scientific research proves that it's not even possible, that you don't emit the fentanyl through your skin like that. Even in extreme uses, in extreme overdose cases, you're never emitting fentanyl through your skin. It doesn't break that blood barrier to leave your bloodstream and then come out through your pores. That just that isn't scientifically factual.
Right. So when they were in the class, I believe they were told that a police officer heard about this from the using addicts in the neighborhood. Like, that's how this propaganda was given to them this time. That was where the Narcan party was going on. The police officer found out about it, but like, just in a worrisome way, basically every 14-year-old in Cecil County just got this message, right? This is the story being taught. And then we wonder about all the old wives' tales from, years past that our parents might have told us that just aren't true and have no scientific basis, but they didn't have the resources then and the internet to spread the word. And so I kind of believed that we were going to move past all these old wives' tales now that we have all this wonderful science and the ability to access it at any moment with the little rectangle in our pocket that talks to space, right? Like, it shouldn't be misinformation being spread like this. And yet here we are, because people want to have a judgment of people, maybe. And that's what I found out. So when I looked this up, I was like, you know what? I have an opinion on this. I think it's ridiculous, but let me actually do a search. And I didn't do a super thorough search, but I did look. There was an article that was in the newspaper, and the second article was an actual research paper written about this. And it referred to them as Lazarus parties instead of Narcan. And Lazarus, of course, being the guy in the Bible that came back from the dead. And so what they talked about wasn't so much, is this factual or not, because they pretty much dispelled that as a ridiculous idea to begin with. They talked more about the role that these kind of stories and propaganda serve in a public environment, right? And we make up these folk tales and these weird little stories because we do want to put a judgment on a certain type of people. We want first responders to think twice before they touch somebody who's in an overdose before they help them, right? Oh, think twice about that. You might not want to get too close. It might hurt you too, right? Oh, well, if we're going to supply all this Narcan, they're just going to use it for the wrong thing. We should stop wasting our tax dollars on these people who don't love themselves and are killing themselves. Just let them die, right? That's where all this comes from. This all comes from a judgment of addicts. And that's sad.
Yeah, there's a lot of that happens. I mean, when you really, if anyone took the time to really dig into a lot of the harm reduction techniques that are coming out now and becoming a little more well-known and a little more popular, and looked at the research on, like, say, the scientific evidence on how, one, the war on drugs over the last 20 years and our efforts to arrest and lock up our way out of this problem. You can look into that all on its own and realize what an abysmal failure that's been. And that this, the moral belittling and degrading of addicts has not done anything but perpetuate a problem. One of the things you talked about was this misinformation coming out from like schools or public authorities. And I wish they would think through sometimes the effects of that later, because as you talked about in the 80s, like we had the, this is your brain on drugs. And this is what happens, if you smoke weed, you're going to go out and start murdering people and raping people in the streets. As a teenager growing up at that time, that was never my experience. Right. You know what I mean? I smoked weed a couple times. It was kind of fun. I felt a little goofy. We got the munchies, and it was it was like, It wasn't this all of a sudden I was, stabbing my neighbors and, robbing from the local store. Like, that just wasn't the experience. And it wasn't the experience. Not only was it not my experience, it wasn't the experience of anyone that I knew at 15 and 16-year-old that was smoking weed. Like, It just was bullshit. So what happens is you learn to just discredit everything that they're saying, and that local authority, who you would typically look at as someone who is going to provide you with good information, becomes a bunch of bullshit that has no credibility with you as a young adult anymore, and they're like, oh, they're going to tell you whatever bullshit they want to get you to think the way they want you to think. And, it actually serves a disservice to the people that they serve to perpetuate this sort of propaganda, scare tactic, BS. I mean, it's like honest communication, as you said, especially nowadays when the research is out there. You can take 10 minutes and research any of this on your own. Kids are doing that all the time. They're in Reddit groups or they're in whatever Discord groups and chatting with each other and talking about their shared experiences. And soon as 10 or 15 of them get together and go, well, we've never seen that. We've never even heard of that. Like, that's some made up bullshit.
Right.
All your credibility with the rest of the things that you've told them about addiction go out the window because you're full of shit.
Right. The parts that might be true and helpful, you're no longer believing in.
Right. And so, you know, and if you dug into some of the harm reduction techniques, myself included, like in the beginning, I'm like, are we enabling people? Like, are we just helping people use? Are we just helping people get high? You know, I don't know if these are really good things. You know, for myself personally, it was the consequences of my using that spurred me to seek recovery. So there are some of those issues that are a bit of a gray area that should be discussed. I'm not going to lie. They need to be talked about. But the results of harm reduction techniques versus the results of trying to arrest our way out of the problem are there. These programs, you know, when I talk about harm reduction, I'm specifically talking about decriminalization is one, legalized injection sites or safe use sites, needle exchange programs, all these things, when you look at the evidence and where these things have been put in place, have been proven to have good results, better results than what we've been doing in the past.
Yes.
But we'll ignore the scientific evidence because of our moral beliefs that we're enabling addiction and that we're, you know, by making drugs or, you know, making it easier for them to get high, that somehow perpetuates the problem and encourages use. And all the evidence, all the scientifically based evidence would show you that that is not true. That in areas where they've had these, you know, insight up in Canada, Vancouver, Canada is one. There's a couple that they've done over in England. I can't remember the city. It might be in London. Also in Portugal, they've done decriminalization. Like, there's a couple different places where there's evidence of these programs being in practice. And they do serve to reduce crime rates. One of the big things that people care about, even if you don't like addiction, they do serve to reduce crime rates, connect people with recovery resources. You see a decrease in, you know, young folks getting into addiction when you're providing resources and education that's practical.
Yeah, so I would agree with you. You know, the research on that is very clear. It's out there. It's not up in the air for debate anymore, honestly. I think you're right. We act a lot of times on a moral code system that honestly we're probably not living in some other area of our life, but we want to enforce it in this one because that's, I guess, the more important place, or we react to a gut feeling about certain things instead of following the scientific thoughts about it. So even the scientific points that way, right? Their proof is showing that this is the better way to go. And I would say even my own experience, even though I'm with you, I kind of had some questions about it at first, and maybe there's some gray area around this. Like, my experience, I think when I look at it, really proves that this is probably the way to go too. So I remember coming in and I had all these consequences and I said, oh, that must be what it takes to get to the point of being done, right? This bottom that I hit must be what it takes. But then after I'd been around and heard enough people's stories, I heard that different people had different bottoms, right? Some people came in and found the same recovery I did, who still had their jobs and still made really good money and weren't in, you know, about to go broke or homeless or any of that. Like, they had just completely different bottoms that were spiritual in nature or some other method of, you know, hitting a bottom that was annoying enough that they wanted to do something about it. And so I would say that just in that experience and looking at it, knowing that everybody does it differently, and I've watched people on methadone hit some sort of bottom while they continued to use it. I've watched people on Suboxone hit a bottom where they've continued to use it and choose a different path of complete abstinence. So I don't think that they're not getting some kind of consequence to lead them to wherever it is they need to be, right? Even though in my brain it says they're avoiding consequences by using them, maybe I would have been avoiding consequences using those substances, but people are still finding that using them, hey, I'm staying alive for today, but I'm still finding reasons in the long run that I don't want to be on this for the rest of my life.
Right. And even for myself, I mean, when I found recovery this time, like methadone was always available. I knew about methadone programs. I knew what they were. It wasn't like, I didn't choose that path because it wasn't available to me. No, it was there. I chose a different path because it just fell more in line with what my goals and what my morals were at the time.
Right.
I think sometimes when we talk about addiction and entering in this path of recovery, and don't get me wrong, I get as defensive about this word recovery and what that means, and that can be a whole conversation. There are some applications of it that I find offensive, but whatever. But when we talk about recovery for individuals, we have to look at what are the goals. And if your goal is to say that anyone that has a drug problem should be abstinent, you're just setting yourself up for failure. You're setting yourself up for just utopia that's never going to exist. And if you go out to say, some, young lady who's out there prostituting on the street, or some guy who's, sleeping in the local storage unit down at the end of the block, to say to that guy, hey, if you just stop using drugs tomorrow and start going to some 12-step meetings, your life is going to be great. And you're going to be living in a house, and you're going to have a job, and you're going to have all these things. Like, that jump is so monumental, in their head. It's like, wait a minute, just stopping doing drugs. No offense, but usually they have way more problems than that, whether it's legal, financial, mental health issues. There's a myriad of issues that lead people to hit that bottom. Not to mention that years of drug abuse have severe effects on your mental capabilities.
Right. And there's two glaring problems with the theory you just laid out that people have. One is that they not only say that abstinence is the only way, but now. Right. It's not like, hey, let's work towards abstinence 2 years from now.
Right. Or 3 years from now.
Some
right.
MATs, some medically assisted treatment to get there.
Right.
It's abstinence the only answer, and it's the answer now. Right.
Right this minute.
Right. Right. So that's the one problem, right? There's no method of getting there if you are in a space where you need some more help to kind of get to that process. The other problem with that idea is what in these people's lives who have this judgment that complete abstinence is the only answer now, what are they not living? Like, what are they participating in that's probably not healthy for their life that they're well aware of and they just have no ability to stop, right? Is it overeating? Is it eating fast food too many days a week? Like, what are they killing themselves with? Is it eating too much sugar? Like, there's always something going on that people are doing that we wish we could change. In my experience, I have never lived a point in my life where I'm like, man, I don't need to change anything. I'm living perfectly healthy, right? I'm not smoking, so I'm not removing years of my life. Like, there's always something to work on. And so I'm like, okay, if these people really believe that you can just stop at any point in time, then why the fuck aren't they stopping whatever it is they're doing that's leading them to die sooner?
Yeah, and not only that, I mean, what worked for them doesn't necessarily work for someone else. I mean, absolutely. I can tell you myself, like, diet wise, like, I don't eat all that great. I'll have times where I do better than others, but I have historically, I'll eat a bowl of cereal right before bed, or a bowl of ice cream or chocolate or whatever. And just genetics, I have a really high metabolism. I burn it off. I don't store fat like a different person. So it's not fair of me to say to someone, well, if you eat what I eat, you would be thin. Like, I'm a fairly thin guy. I'm 6 foot tall and like 160 pounds, pretty thin, pretty lean. And I don't necessarily, it's not because I'm some, regimented eater or that I have all this willpower that, no, I eat like shit. I eat terribly, but I just don't put on weight because of my genetics. So in that vein, if I said to someone, oh, if you just eat exactly like me, you'll be my same build and weight, that's just not true. And it's the same for someone's mental health or someone's addiction problem. Like, whether you do what I do or not doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get what I got from it, or even gain the same benefits intellectually or spiritually that I got from it. I think what we need to do is help people set more realistic goals. I mean, if you said to someone, yeah, my goal is to run a marathon, and they've never ran, a day in their life, you wouldn't tell them, okay, well then go out tomorrow and start running, 26 miles and see how you do.
Right.
Like that would be terrible
After
advice.
you get 26, then the next day you can do the 0.2.
Right. It would be completely discouraging. It would be completely, you would feel just hopeless. It would feel like a hopeless accomplishment. You would say, no, let's get out there. All right, let's get out there and start running, see where you can run. And maybe if we can meet people at that place of saying, okay, what condition are you in now? Are you homeless, shooting up with dirty needles, running the risk of whatever health ailments, hepatitis or whatever, AIDS or whatever other? How can we get you at least to a place where death isn't looking you in the face every single day, every moment? Like, let's get you to some kind of stable spot. Maybe that's with, counseling along with, medicated assisted treatment. Maybe that's an inpatient facility. Maybe that's an inpatient mental health facility. I mean, you try to address each person and meet them where they're at and give them like what I would consider a realistic goal that keeps them encouraged and hopeful. And it doesn't mean that, abstinence can't be the end goal 5 years from now, but maybe that's never their fucking goal, and that's okay for them. Right. Maybe it's okay that they say, I don't really want to be abstinent. Okay. Well, how do we keep you from, dying, killing yourselves, resorting to criminal activity? Because those are the things that make our communities unsafe.
Right. We want everybody to be abstinent, but we are okay with people who, socially drink and still raise their children and participate in life. Why can't we have people who are on, MATs for the rest of their life that do the same? Yeah. It's funny you said marathon. So I know a lady that, and I'm going to say this wrong and she's going to fucking correct me. I know she is. Ultra marathons or something. Yeah. She runs like 100 miles. Dude.
Yeah, that's an ultra marathon.
At one time. Yeah. And I'm like, holy fuck, right? And so she'll tell me about how she's out training. And she's like, oh, yeah, I ran like 15 miles before I came, today. And I'm like, I would die, right? And every time she's like, no, you wouldn't, because that's not where you start.
Right.
And it's the same idea, right? Like you don't start at 15 miles. You start at a mile, maybe, or half a mile, or whatever it is. And you build up to it. I like the idea of including the person that needs help in the planning of what they want their treatment to be, right? That is a big thing in the mental health community, at least in the type of therapy that I do and I'm familiar with. Like we always include, like, what is it you're here for? Maybe I see a whole lot of stuff in some of my clients where they need to like, oh my God, you need to do way past that, right? But if that's not what you want, we're never going to get there.
We're never going to do it.
What is it you are trying to get, right? I just want to help you get there. Once we get there, maybe you want something more. I don't know. But like right now, like what do you really want and are willing to work towards?
Right. And even as a using addict, like I didn't, like morally and probably intellectually, I knew that I needed to stop using drugs. I mean, I didn't necessarily think drugs were ever like good for me or that they were helping my life in any way. Like I could see the obvious problems they were causing for me, but I didn't think that I could stop. Like I didn't believe that there was a way out or that would ever get better or ever change. And it wasn't until that change and that hope became my goal that I bought into the idea. Because like I say, I got locked up my first time at 17. They were like, hey man, you have a drug problem, sent me to rehab. It was obvious. Like it was, and I knew that, I should stop. But until I bought into the idea that I needed to stop, until I made the decision, which is part of when we talk about step work, like that's part of that first 3 steps is understanding like, look, I need to make this decision that this is what I need to do. You can go and tell people that's what they need to do till you're fucking blue in the face. And it is just, I don't know about you. I don't know. That has never worked for me or in my trying to do that for other people.
Yeah. What does it say? I think in one of our fancy books, for the first time in a long time, we made a decision. We made it. Yeah. It wasn't made for us by the judges, the institutions, the lawyers, the parents. Like it was a decision we had to make. And
and this abstinence-based recovery, you can lead people towards that. You can talk with them about that. But if they're not buying in, then they're not gonna do it. And if your attitude is, well, it's abstinence or nothing, then you're just as bad as the fucking cops or the other people that say, let the addicts die in the streets. We want nothing to do with them. If you're an abstinence-based person that doesn't have compassion for suffering addicts enough to try to help them to stop dying, you're the same thing, just with a different hat.
Well, on that note, let's take a break for our Voices ad, and I think we're going to come back with a little more propaganda, maybe centered around alcohol, which is an interesting topic. Right back.
This episode has been brought to you by Voices of Hope, Inc., a nonprofit grassroots recovery organization located in Maryland. Voices of Hope is a community-based organization that fights to protect the rights of people who struggle with substance use. Please support them by attending their 5th annual gratitude banquet on February the 15th. Tickets are $60 a person and sponsorships are available. Please visit them on the web at www.voicesofhopececilmd.org.
All right, here we are. We're back. We want to talk a little bit more about this propaganda idea, moving away from the Narcan party. Before we get into it, though, I did mean to mention, if anybody's still listening, I probably should have said this earlier. We broke down. We're on Instagram now. It's I don't know how to Instagram /recovery sort of with some underscores in there somewhere. I'm sure if you look for us, you can probably find us, or if you go on Anchor to listen to the podcast, I think there's a link on there from there. So we are on there now. We'd love to interact with everybody, so that's great. What else did we do? Oh, we kind of came up with a concept for cover art, and now we just need to find somebody that draws really well or does computer drawing. One of the two. The incredible thing is we both have wives with some artistic talent and cannot convince either of them to do this for us. And I'm like, God, what's wrong with my wife? Like, help me.
Yeah, and I'd also like to say, if you're artistic or you have an artistic idea or you're creative and you think, wow, I think the podcast, this represents the podcast well, we're open to artwork, ideas, or anything anyone wants to submit to take a look at.
Billy's open to ideas. I think now that I have one, I'm pretty set on it.
Oh,
I like
it. I'm sorry,
good with
Jason's got an idea I need to draw.
I just need it drawn up, damn it. But no, so anyway, we are on Instagram and we are working towards the cover art as soon as we get an artist to do that kind of thing. So back to the topic at hand now. And one other thing. So we're on YouTube, and we've kind of had this debate about whether we're going to put speaker shares on our podcast or not, and we still can't really entirely figure that out. But I did I came across the old share of mine, and I don't even know when it's from, Billy. I don't know if it's from like 2013, 2011. Like it's ancient, and I didn't listen to it. I was like, fuck it, I'm just putting it up. So if you're curious about, what kind of nonsense I was talking years back, which I'm sure is probably very similar to the nonsense I talk now, but slightly different, you can go on our YouTube and find that and listen to it. And I'm sure that's interesting. And you can, email us and tell me how fucked up my thoughts were back then too. So back to the topic at hand, back to this conversation where this all started. I'm driving my daughters to basketball practice. They're telling me about this life skills class where they're learning about, drug addiction and alcoholism, apparently, at least at first. I don't know if that's the whole class or not. And so they learn about the Narcan party. I tell them how ridiculous that is. And then they continue to tell me about this life skills class, which I got to say, I'm happy they were talking to me about it. It's pretty neat that they wanted to talk to their father about something. Maybe they just thought I could identify. They do know my history, right? And so my daughter's just kind of musing about the whole idea of drugs, and hopefully she'll never use them, and that's her goal and all this. And then she mentions alcohol, and she's like, I know it's kind of a drug, but I just feel different about it, right? And that statement hurt me so much, that little statement of I just feel a little different about it. Because in that moment, I realized that, like, what we like to refer to as big alcohol or whatever, the alcohol industry and the billions of dollars they have spent to convey this idea that alcohol is a little different, right, has worked. It's fucking worked. And it's been, my 14-year-old daughters already have that idea from the world, the propaganda that alcohol is somehow different, even though it's one of the worst poisons you can put in your body. And it's just, I think it's a very worldwide sentiment, at least United States wide, that alcohol is slightly different than these other drugs, and I don't fucking know why, because it's not.
Yeah, it's amazing that we put, these they're all drugs into different categories on our moral judgments on, whether they're quote unquote good or bad or okay or not okay. People definitely, at least in my experience, seem to be more understanding or empathetic to someone who identifies as an alcoholic or says that they had a drinking problem. That seems to be far less stigmatizing than saying you were an addict or a person that struggled with, a heroin addiction or another, specific addiction.
Right.
And it doesn't, and it's all just pictures we create in our mind. It's like that stigma of what we picture when someone identifies as a heroin addict or what we picture when someone identifies as an alcoholic. Right. And it's crazy how they really can be the same thing. They can look very, very similar.
Absolutely.
And definitely the consequences and the damage done by either one of those addiction problems can be identical within families, what it does to children, what it does to loved ones, what it does to, death.
Yeah. So if you look on Twitter or Instagram, right, this is something I found a little bit interesting. The immediate thing, if you look at people and what they call themselves or refer to themselves in recovery, if you look at hashtag sober, there is a fuck ton of people, right? And if you look at hashtag clean, you're going to find people that make soap in their basement. And that's maybe a little problem partly because of the words, but I will say that even going further than that, I've looked into the different expressions, right? If you look at the expressions for that people use in AA, you're going to see stuff like one day at a time or as it's shortened, just the acronyms of ODAT. That's way more used than like the Just for Today or JFT. Even though the one day at a time also is apparently like a Mexican sitcom or something like that, there's still plenty, like that's way more used. And it seemed like AA sayings are people are way more able to express them openly in the social network, I guess is what I'm getting at, which makes sense of what we're talking about. It's more socially acceptable to have had alcohol. And it's just bothersome that my 14-year-old daughters have already caught on to this, right? Even the safety response from the alcohol industry of how to be safe with your alcohol use tells you to drink.
Yeah.
It's drink responsibly, right? Not, hey, if you're not feeling like drinking or you're out somewhere where you can't drive, maybe don't drink. Drink responsibly, but definitely drink, right? That's the first word.
Drinking's fine.
Right. Just do it responsibly.
And it is a weird concept to think, I have to push myself sometimes to actually get on board with this because it is a little bit weird to think like, I will say my personal experience is I haven't really known too many what I would call social heroin users. Most of the people that I know that use heroin were addicts.
Right.
Now, they could be easily identified as alcoholics and whatever other names we have for these different addictions, right. Because we were living a lifestyle that was just to get as obliviated as possible, as often as possible. So we abused all sorts of drugs, which is kind of common. But to say that, I knew people that were social heroin users is not really, for me, not been my experience. But I guess I'm told they do exist, that they are out there and that there are people that can, go out and party on the weekends and maybe, do some heroin and not totally wreck their lives.
I don't know about heroin, but I've definitely heard of that concept with like cocaine.
Right.
And that's nothing in my story. Like I'm not socially using any of that shit, but I guess people do possibly. And it's weird to think of like if you had a bar for cocaine or heroin, that would be a very strange concept, right? Like people hit it after work for a couple hours and then go home, or
and even within the like the harm reduction community, there's different discussions on whether you want to go as far as legalization of all drugs. So there's two different concepts. One is decriminalization, which is you just don't lock people up for possessing heroin or cocaine or whatever drug that they have. It's not against the law if you have, a personal use amount and you're getting high with yourself somewhere. You don't lock people up for that. You don't arrest them for that. That's not a crime. Versus actually legalization, which is where you make these drugs available similar to alcohol and the other ones. That is a debate within the harm reduction community on how far to go with that.
Yeah, let me get a pack of Newports and some Dopies.
Right. And me personally, I'm for the legalization part, I think, for a couple reasons. Not because I think it's great, but I don't think that we have the right to moralize with people what decisions they should be making. And if we're going to have alcohol or tobacco legal, to me personally, there isn't a lot of difference between all the rest of them. Like if you can use heroin responsibly and you can get it from a reputable store that you're not getting, stomped on fentanyl laced drugs that are dangerous and harmful, or at least what the levels are when you buy them.
Right. It's got the FDA.
Right, it's got an FDA regulation on it. Like, I'm all for that, but I get that that's pretty extreme.
Tells you the nutrition label. Maybe there's some sugar in it.
But I also label myself as less government is better. We don't necessarily need the government to tell us what we need to do for ourselves.
I'm one step further. I think we should actually fucking provide it for people for free. I don't even think they should have to buy it in the store. Like, not only legalize it, just give it to them for free if that's what they want.
Yeah, and that's actually been a concept that's been tried over in some European places, and up in Canada they've actually had, and it was done here in the United States actually back in the 70s in California. They had some clinics where people could go in the morning. They would inject you with heroin, whatever. I can't remember the differences between the different programs, but in one of these programs, you could go there as often as you wanted, as much as you wanted, and they would legally inject you with a medical grade heroin, and it was safe. And they found that, people were able to be productive then. They could, they didn't have to worry about the drug seeking behavior and all the criminalization that goes along with it, that they could then get high and go to their job, or get high and go do what they needed to do, and that they were way more functioning, and, that it was a good program.
I wouldn't be functioning at all.
Government stepped in and put a kibosh on that.
Right. I don't know that ended. Functioning.
But these things did exist. They have been, enacted at times, and there is evidence behind them. There's statistical evidence behind, how they work, what the results were. And it is always surprising when you look at the evidence that it's not what your gut tells you that it should be.
Just to be clear, I don't anticipate if we give drugs away for free, any drug to anyone who wants it for free, and they can use it as much as they want in this safe use site and stay alive, I don't anticipate any of them being productive, right? That is not what I'm thinking. I'm just thinking they're not robbing people. They're not stealing from the store. They're not driving up consumer prices and people's misery and jail prices and all these other things. That's my goal. Like, it's the harm reduction option, right? Let's not continue to cause all these extra costs we have in our lifetime. I'm not anticipating they're going to work and providing a service to the community whatsoever.
Yeah, and it is hard to get the, whatever I'll call it, moralism, puritanistic values out of all of this.
Right.
We, in this country, take, like, say, the medical field. Like, we don't overly moralize and chastise people who are heavily obese or overweight and that eat excessively to the point of heart conditions and heart ailments.
Right.
We provide them every possible medical option available, to sustain and improve their life. And we keep giving them the information on healthy diet and exercise and all that stuff. And some of them take it, and some of them abide by it and get better, and others of them don't, and they're back in and out of the hospital. They continue to struggle with their health issues, and we don't, as a society, ever seem to go, fuck them. They made bad choices with their life. They don't get to, we're not treating you anymore. Just go die in the street.
They're all having Big Mac eating parties.
Right. They're having McDonald's binge parties, and then it's just crazy that we moralize addiction in this way, and I don't know. The more I study about it and the more open-minded I try to be about it, the more shocking it is that this has been our approach.
And with all so look, we're going to decide that one drug needs to be legal, right? That's our goal. And I hate that idea, but if that's what we're going to do, I can tell you right now from my little bit of studies and learning on the subject, alcohol is not the safe one I'm choosing as the one we make legal, right? It's not the one that's best for us. It promotes like violence. It promotes a culture of, possibly a culture of sexual assault. Like, it promotes a whole lot of ideas that aren't good for people. People are dying in car accidents because they're driving, unsafe and risky behavior, like promiscuity that's not safe and chosen. It's very not the drug I'm going to choose if I get to pick one. All the internal damage to your bodily organs. I do think, not that I think any of these is a great idea, but marijuana is probably the safer option of all of them. If we're going to have one legal one in the United States, maybe we could have, marijuana bars, and people can frustrate everybody by driving 15 miles an hour on the highway and, sitting at stop signs waiting for them to turn green. Like, I think that's the better way to go. When my daughter said that out of her mouth, man, the thing that really came to mind was, fuck, they won.
Yeah.
Right? All that money won.
Yeah.
They've sold the idea and we've bought it. Hook, line, and sinker.
Yeah. And I mean, when you look at the statistics on alcoholism and alcohol-related deaths, so they call it alcohol use disorder now. One statistic I was looking at here from 2018, this came from the Journal of American Medicine, 14.4 million adults 18 or over, plus another 400,000 adolescents between 12 and 17 suffered from alcohol use disorder in 2017. So, 2018. So that's, almost 15 million people suffer from abuse. This isn't just use. This is abuse. And yet, that's fine. Alcohol's great. It's perfectly legal and safe. I also know deaths wise.
Well, just to note, that's who sought treatment, right?
Right.
Like, that's the people that got caught or hit a bottom. Like, that's not everybody.
Right. That's not even counting.
There's still your dad out there talking about, I go to work every day. Not your dad in particular, but somebody's dad. I go to work every day. I'm not an alcoholic.
Yeah, and annually, on average, 88,000 people per year die from alcohol-related incidents. Some of those, obviously accidents and things. It's also some from alcohol poisoning. Basically, alcohol is the third leading cause of death. The first is tobacco, and the second is poor diet and physical activity.
Right.
So, yet we, moralize addiction as being this terrible thing. If you're an opioid addict, but you can be an alcohol addict, and it's perfectly okay and acceptable and legal because, or addicted to tobacco and, those things are fine. But yet we look at drug addiction as something different. Right. And historically, and it's not a historical thing. If you look historically back through time, different cultures have been using psychedelics and, different drugs for medicinal or spiritual practices. Drugs have been around a long time, and we haven't had these historical levels of, drugs of abuse and deaths and those things until fairly recently.
Right.
I think a lot of this gets back to the point of, what do you think addiction really is? And we need to stop blaming the substance. It's not the substance's fault. And I mean that for alcohol too. Like, say, alcohol isn't the problem. Heroin isn't the problem. Marijuana isn't the problem. The problem is the person and their usage of it. And then looking at some of the causes and reasons, why do these people use it that way? And is there something we can do to help them stop using it that way?
Yeah.
Go
ahead.
And, to just moralize at them and lecture them and tell them how wrong they are is not working. Like, even if you believe it's the right thing to do, when do you just go, hey, this, whether I believe it's the right thing to do or not, it isn't working.
Right. When do you acknowledge
it's a failure
instead of blindly moving forward?
Right.
And I think what you're talking about comes a lot into interplay of culture, right? We look at gun violence, right? There's guns all over the world, but they're not having the mass shootings we have here, right? Why is that? It's got to be the culture that we put out there, and I think part of it is this puritanistic view. And I'm not against having morals, right? I believe in having some morals, but the country was kind of founded upon the idea that we don't want other people to tell us what our morals should be. We don't want other people to tell us what fucking church we should go to and what religion we should have, right? We don't want other people to tell us exactly what morals we should have. And yet, ever since we got here, we've been telling everybody what fucking morals they should have and then feeling like shit when we don't live up to them. Right. I think that's the problem, right? We all like have this self-hatred because we're shamed about not being able to live up to these morals that we're not even sure we believe in. And so we have these mass shootings and gun violence. We have this overuse of drugs and again, here I am. I've bought into it too. The alcohol companies got me. Drugs and alcohol. Alcohol's a fucking drug, right? Why do I got to separate them? But I do every time. If it's if it's the third leading cause of death, why do we not realize that maybe it shouldn't be legal, right? I just don't know. I mean, I get that it didn't work very well when we tried to make it illegal, but I'm really confused by it. And so I was on Instagram, and I'll give credit. I don't know if this person invented this, probably not, because it's got a quote. But Sober Story 2020 had a little picture with some words on it, and it's credited to Ed Lattimore. But I love this idea, Billy. Alcohol is the only drug where if you don't do it, people assume you have a problem. Right. That's a fucking incredible statement. If you don't drink, if you're not willing to go to happy hour with the guys after work one day, or you don't go to the company Christmas party because you don't drink and that's what they do there, well, why? Right? Yeah. What's wrong?
Oh, loosen up. Have a beer or two. Right. It's fine. You'll be good.
That's an incredible thing. How wondrous are the advertisers for alcohol that they've managed to make it if you don't do it, something's wrong with you. They're brilliant. I need them to fucking advertise for my podcast, really. Like, they can fucking sell anything.
And, you know, we see this now, like the overreaction, I'll call it the overreach of blaming the substance, again, come with the opioid addiction. They're taking pain pills away from people that actually legitimately need them and should have them. Right. You know, we had a story, a family member had a ruptured gallbladder, and, you know, it ruptured. They had to go and do all this surgery. They had to, you know, clean them all out. After that, he had some infections and stuff. And this is a guy that works in the medical industry. He's forget the name, the person that reads x-rays. I don't know if you remember what that's called, but
X-ray technician.
Yeah, X-ray technician. There's a fancier name. Yeah, I don't know. There's a fancy name for people that radiology. Something like that. Yeah, Anyway, he reads X-rays. So he works in a hospital in the medical field. Why he was going through all this, they had given him some pain medication. He was still in a lot of pain, and he had to go to them and say, "Hey, can I get more pain medication?" And they said no. They said, "No, you can't have any more. We can't give you any more now." So here is a professional person in the medical field who's suffering through a horrible experience, and they're telling him, "No, you have to lay here in pain." Because we have what I believe is a social problem, not a substance problem. We have a social problem. So you have to suffer as a consequence. I mean, it's just terrible. And this is coming from the medical profession, who you would expect to be the most educated, the most up to date on the science and research between what we know causes addiction, between the links between the actual substances of dependence and addiction. You know, it's incredible.
It is. And so to kind of bring this idea to a close, I guess really what we're hoping for, and then definitely at least what I'm hoping for, I don't want to speak for Billy too much because we disagree a lot, it's just that if you have an opinion about, MATs or anything really, complete abstinence as the only path to recovery, maybe we can just take a little softer stance on it, right? Maybe it's, okay, abstinence is a great way to recovery. And there's some other ways out there that that really don't take away from abstinence, right? Like if people find recovery in MATs, that doesn't take away from abstinence-based recovery. In fact, that makes somebody who has found abstinence-based recovery able to feel that much more special about what they are doing, right? That's really powerful that they're doing that. And I don't think that allowing people in MATs to also be considered on a recovery path takes away from that. I think it makes it even more special, personally.
Yeah, and I think that sometimes we need to look at, what are our goals? What do we want for other suffering addicts? I mean, obviously, again, abstinence can be the main goal at the end, if that's the way you want to look at it, the top goal. But if we set some lower goals of just less suffering, and trying to help people reach a place where they can get stable and in a healthy environment with mental health counseling or addiction counseling, and then build towards abstinence. It doesn't have to be a immediate thing that we do right away.
Yeah, and so we'd love to get your thoughts. We love everybody's input. I think this conversation gets better the more input we get. Like I said earlier, we're on Instagram now. Find us there, Twitter. Tell people about the podcast who listen to podcasts that you think might be interested in, participating in the conversation. We'd love to hear your views. You can email us. You can leave a voice message for us. Like all of these things exist, and we literally really do want your input. We might mention it and talk about how awful we think it is, but we do want it at least to have concepts and ideas. So with that being said, everybody have a good week. That wraps up this episode. Please subscribe, rate, and review this podcast on your preferred platform. If you have ideas for topics you'd like us to talk about or just want to add an opinion, contact us through Anchor, email us at recoverysortof@gmail.com, or find us on Twitter @recoverysortof.